Welcome back to the Kingsway Podcast.
Welcome.
Glad you're here. We are continuing our journey along our Kingsway values.
Yes.
And I know this is number 2, so if you missed number 1, it's not completely necessary that you go back and watch, but I think as long as you watch all 6 at some point, that would be healthy.
It's not like they build on each other and there were spoilers at the end of one that you're going to hear in this one. You're good. All you'll be missing is a fuller picture of who we are as a church, as Kingsway Christian Church in Mount Vernon, Missouri.
And if you've been listening to our podcast, or we found out we have a person listening from Ireland,
from Leinstrad.
Leinstrad sounds close enough.
Yep.
But we had one. I was like, we have a person listening from Ireland. That's impressive. That's awesome.
They're really interested in our church.
Well, whether you are a person that's been able to attend, or you've been just watching online, or just checking out the podcast because of our hot takes, and that episode's awesome, by the way.
It's a great episode.
It's a really fun one. We wanted you to know what Kingsway is about, and part of why I think this is important, we clarified this in the last one, these values, what we're talking about today, help you understand and know who we are and where we're going. And it really is a part of and a goal of Ryan's cell phone going off in the middle of the podcast.
That's what we're after.
That's what we're but it's not there anymore. So we're going to push past that.
Yeah.
Into real things.
As I text the caller to our podcast back very quickly.
Well, like I was saying before, we had to go off topic for 30 seconds. We want these values to be something that you understand where we're going. They came off of and came out of a desire to understand the future ministry of Kingsway, and how to better do that is to create something like this that is a focus, that is a foundation, that's a thing that we can use to move forward when things are difficult. Or we're faced with difficult choices, limited resources, limited time, and honestly choosing between sometimes 2 good things or 3 great things, but trying to do the best thing. And so that's where these values come from. Before we get there, I want to do a slight little nugget. We talked about it for just a second in the last podcast. We mentioned it, but I want to do just a quick little intro to Free Brian Williams by Malcolm Gladwell.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
This is an advertisement for a podcast episode of a different podcast within this podcast.
It's one of those things that, like, we watched this and then we went to lunch, and I watched you for the first 10 minutes that we sat at lunch, watched your world crumble a little bit in your mind.
Yeah.
Like you were like second guessing everything.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if I was totally second guessing everything. I was just trying to tie what he was talking about to like 10 different topics and just see how that helped inform it. So basically, the second episode of Malcolm Gladwell's podcast, Revisionist History, the second episode in a series on memory is called Free Brian Williams.
We'll try to tag that so that you can find it. We'll try to tag that.
It'll be down in the description, in the whatever.
I think we can put it down there.
Yeah, I think so. I think we'll be okay with it.
Yep.
Anyway, it was a really cool, we didn't finish it, but the episode was basically about how our memories are not totally reliable, detail on detail.
Well, it was silly because we were on a date.
Yeah.
Your wife and my wife, we went on a double date.
Yeah.
And we were talking about, and I was trying to remember this episode on memory,
which is hilarious.
And it was like a conundrum of conundrums because I was basically saying like memory is really hard to trust, and I didn't have the word at the time, but it's flashbulb memories or flash.
Yeah. Think like old photography where they have that one flash bulb.
And it just makes everything kind of stick and stay in those old Polaroids. In those types of events, so like Challenger exploding, Berlin Wall falling, 9/11, some of these things. And so one of the things we got on was just how Malcolm Gladwell's research and some of the things that he talked about was that memory, even in those really intense traumatic moments, is untrustworthy, and how the confidence that we come in with is really hard to understand that we don't. And so I was explaining this, doubting that I was remembering the podcast as well as I was. Like I was like trying to explain this to your wife Sharon, and then trying to explain it to you, and they
were all like jeering at you. Like,
I was like, I'm trying
wrong
to remember. Well, and it really came down to my wife talking about how sometimes I struggle with getting things in the right order with the right details. Most of the time, all my content is true. It's just I've mismatched it. And they called it in this podcast called slicing,
Time slicing.
Time slicing, right? Where
that sounds like a great movie.
It does, actually. Time slicing.
I'm the time slicer.
Really? I'll have a piece of that.
In a world.
2021 meets 2001.
Yeah.
So the concept of this, though, and this is what's so interesting, they take people and they ask them like 3 to 4 questions about 9/11. Where were you when the towers fell? What were you doing? What were you feeling?
They ask them first, like within a month or less after it happened.
And they actually have them write it down.
Yeah. So it can be in their own handwriting. Yeah. So they actually write down what happened.
Yeah. So they write it down, and then they ask them again a year later. And then they ask them 5 years later. And then they eventually ask them 10 years later. And I won't spoil everything for you, but I will just tell you that the amount that people got wrong was surprising. The details that changed, I should say, in their accounts.
The amount they got wrong was more than the amount they got right by a little bit, not by a large amount.
And then also the confidence that these people had that they were right, that they had it all,
that they remembered it exactly right. And what I loved is he talked about a psychologist who talked about people and experiencing flashbulb memories, and he said things like this are just like the death of a parent or something. You feel responsible to remember, and if you don't remember, somebody could very easily say, what kind of person wouldn't remember, blah blah blah. So you feel a responsibility to remember it right, and some of that pressure and some of the importance of the actual event itself almost helps spur on that you don't remember everything perfectly right.
Yeah, absolutely. The reason why I loved it, I love these types of podcasts. They pique my curiosity. Malcolm Gladwell is this awesome writer that loves to do this, like, so you remember 9/11, right?
And you're like,
I thought I did. Like maybe I don't.
Yeah, he's more than a writer. He's a social researcher. So he's not just like an author.
No,
he's a really good writer too. But
he is. And some of this stuff, it interacts with him personally because he lived in New York, and so obviously this topic and everything, it's really personal. I just thought it was funny because then we get to the restaurant. And you're like, so do you think we remember our marriages right? Do you think we remember our childhood memories right?
Yeah.
And you're like, I'll bring it in all my mind. I'm going like, probably not. Like all these like
everything's a lie. Just wait until I die and they unplug me from the Matrix.
Jesus will put the time slices back together.
Yeah. Yeah. But it was a really, really cool and interesting episode. And it doesn't say that all memory is wrong.
No,
that's not the point.
And that was the cool thing. And he basically talks about like we are really good at memorying. Like there's a lot of things that we remember well, I should say. It's just that a lot of times we need to recognize our own limitations to what that looks like, and we struggle with that. Being humble, and that's our like saying like we don't know.
The things in this podcast, especially with the people who were trying to remember 9/11 after it happened, the things that they got wrong were like, was I in the kitchen or was I in the laundry room?
Yeah.
Did I talk to this person face to face or over the phone? The things they did not get wrong were, did 9/11 happen?
Yeah.
Was it traumatic?
And a lot of it was like their emotions and feelings. They were not the wrong emotions and feelings. It was just timing. It was like when, not necessarily that they hadn't felt them or they had felt them.
Anyway, one of the things I tied this to, and this will help us get back on track.
Yeah,
is I tied it to the gospel accounts.
Yeah,
saying that like this kind of gives validation to some of the small discrepancies in the gospels. And when I say discrepancy, I don't mean like polar opposite things. I mean, like Jesus encounters a demoniac person with a demon possessing them at a certain place. One gospel says it was one guy with a demon. Another gospel says it was two guys with a demon.
Yes.
Does that mean that happened or didn't happen? No. If you take a look at this eyewitness research about being an eyewitness, it means that they encountered a guy possessed by a demon, and it was a big enough event that they got the details mixed up.
Yep.
There's a much deeper conversation to have there.
I love that though, because by the end of it, it made sense that some of the, I would say what I would call the linear understanding of some of the gospel accounts are a bigger struggle. But with some of this time slicing stuff, it does make sense.
Yeah. Before we move on, time slicing, what we mean by that and what they meant by that, which is things happened in a similar time period. And when you're going back to reconstruct the one, you fold in the other.
Yep.
They both happened, but you're kind of taking half or 2/3 of each or something like that.
Yep.
And overlaying them on top of each other.
Perfect example is they said like one of the characters or one of the people they were witnessing had a flight that he took the following week after 9/11. But the conversation about how dangerous that flight would be was folded into the day after 9/11 rather than
the day of
9/11,
saying that they were going to take a flight the next day.
And so it was a conversation that really did happen, and it really did happen around 9/11, but it did not happen on the day of 9/11. And because the traumatic, basically the idea of the traumatic event of what happened on 9/11 versus when you flew the first time pretty closely afterwards, all those conversations and things kind of got slammed together.
They got synthesized.
Yes. And it's remembered as one thing.
And the person who remembered that all these were on the same day falsely thought 100%. There's 100%. No doubt in their mind that happened.
Yep.
On the same day.
It is a really neat podcast. It's a really neat concept. It was just one of those silly fun things that we were just listening to or going to lunch, and it ended up being like a thing that I was like, that'd be fun to mention. Podcasts are so neat, and there's so many cool ones. That's like season 2 of 6 seasons of his podcast is called Revisionist History, and it's revisiting history and trying to make sure that we understand it right, reclaim it if it needs to be, or it's worth revisiting to remember. Yeah. And it's really cool stuff, really, really valuable stuff. I find it to be really intriguing and interesting. Podcasts are only like 40 minutes, so it's fun. With that being said, let's transition over to our value for today. It's a good one. Coming off of our last one, I think this will be kind of a healthy one to understand. So here is value number 2 for Kingsway Christian Church as we kind of moving forward, looking for future ministry, defining if you're joining into Kingsway and wanting to take a role, or whether you've been a part of Kingsway for a long time. I want you to recognize how you can continue to be a part of it.
Yeah.
So here it is. Value number 2 is we are contributors, not consumers. The church does not exist for us. It exists for the world.
Yeah.
We are not contributors. We are contributors, not consumers. We are contributors, not consumers. The church does not exist for us. It exists for the world.
Yeah.
So, now at first glance, you're like, cool. What does that mean?
Yeah.
What does that mean? When you hear that, Ryan, we made this clear on the first time, these aren't things you've been around of. You were not a part of making these. You were joining in. When you hear that, I'm curious, like, where does your mind go? Like, what do you think of?
It goes, as you can tell, if you're watching the video version of this podcast, it goes immediately to food. Because there's a difference between when I was growing up, the Sundays we would go to Applebee's after church.
Yeah.
And the Sundays there would be a potluck. And if you didn't grow up Baptist, a potluck is when everybody brings a dish and you have one giant buffet pre-corona of food that everybody made who's
and
showing
they made
up
their
for
special
the most part.
thing. Mm-hmm.
It may be that some people showed up and didn't know it was a potluck.
The potluck.
Potluck and podcast are hard to separate. But there's a difference when it's like, I ordered my whatever this specific way, and Grandma What's Her Bucket made this, and it's always this way, and I like it or I don't, and it seems a lot more communal. It seems a lot more, I just, it feels different when it's a group effort versus like a professional effort. One of those is a community thing, and one of those is a consumer thing.
Dude, and that is, I would say 90% of this value is meant to kill selfish wants in the church.
Yeah.
And to recognize that this is supposed to be something that is for other people as much or if not more than you.
Yeah.
So the concept of this is we are not a country club.
Yeah.
We're not. And so don't come in here with wants and demands, but come in here asking, how can I help? We are not a country club. We're a hospital.
Yeah.
So if you want to be a part of this, that's great. We're here to get things done, not to take care of, your
Not to provide you
not
your
to provide
wants.
your like greatest wants and desires. And the reason why this is really important is because if you've been around church for a really long time, or if you've been around church probably for not that long of a time, you see how quickly you'll look around and you'll go, what's in it for me?
Yeah.
Like, it will.
Honestly, that's part of the conversation sometimes with people asking the question, do I want to be a Christian?
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's just like coming to a Christian and they have a different worldview and the person they're talking to is a Christian, they're like, why should I be a Christian? What's in it for me?
Yeah.
And I think that conversation, there is a lot in it for you.
Absolutely.
Is it a comfortable life, a guarantee at that, and health and whatever? No. What's in it for you? I don't know. The greatest sense of fulfillment on the face of the earth because you engage in relationship with the one true God, the creator of heaven and earth.
Yes. That gave you those gifts and has a special calling for you to join in on what he's already doing.
Yeah. So even in our call to faith, we aren't called to be consumers. Honestly, the end of the Gospel of Matthew, the first book in the New Testament, doesn't end with, wasn't that great? Go on your merry way. It ends with a command, go and make disciples of all nations. And if we can somehow read that and take that to mean we don't have to do anything, we're going to hire a minister to do that so that we can pay him and then do nothing else. That's not biblical.
No.
It's actually not biblical to be a consumer of Christianity.
It's one of those things. This value has a multifaceted thing. The first is when we say we are contributors, not consumers, that means that the church does not exist to provide for you what you want. The church exists as an opportunity for you to provide and to help others.
Yeah.
And so when it says contributors, that means that you have a role to play. You have a giftings that Paul would say. You have special things that you have been blessed with, whether it be possessions and time, whether it just be your attitude and heart, whether it be actual spiritual giftings. I think there is a place for each person to find a way to contribute.
Yeah, and this is really important. It's really important that we are having this conversation. If you didn't watch episode 1, if you don't know who we are, let me introduce us. I'm Ryan, the worship minister at Kingsway Christian Church.
Yeah.
And this is Trevor, the senior pastor, the preaching minister, among other things, at Kingsway Christian Church. And so a lot of churches that I think we grew up in, kinds of churches that we did. So we grew up in the Christian church, but there are other church denominations that have this style, some Baptist churches, some whatever, where they think that church consists of two things, music and sermon.
Yeah.
And both of those things are, even though we sing during the music, things that are provided for us by professionals.
Yep.
In this day and age, for sure. And the fact that we're having this conversation about how it's everybody's job to contribute is really important. If you want to contribute to the sermons, to the music, to other parts of the service, to reading scriptures, to discipling and volunteering with youth kids, and to greeting people, and to whatever, there's a place for you to do that. We do not restrict pretty much any part of anything we do to the paid professionals. Even when we get ready to prepare a message to preach, like we've been preaching through the Gospel of John, how do we do that? Well, it's not just Trevor off in his high and mighty tower, locked in by himself, crafting it. It is that way on Saturday nights a little bit
afterwards.
To put it together. But there's a team of people there's me and him who are paid professional ministers. We're professional Christians. And then there's an elder from our church, one of our volunteer leaders, without a better way to put that. And then there's a person or two who are just a normal church attender who just know the Bible well. And that's a place they can serve, is helping us in this brainstorming session, in this scripture reading and interpreting session.
Yeah.
Define what our church needs to hear from God this Sunday.
And your band is the same way. You have several paid professionals, yourself, maybe someone else that you're asking to come and lead.
As a guest.
But normally, on a normal week, everyone else that's up there with you is a volunteer.
And everybody in the tech booth is a volunteer.
Behind the scenes that's making it work. Probably normally like 6 to 10 people are making that service at the worship side of things, I should say the music side of things, happen.
And one of them is paid.
Yeah. Just one. And the thing that this value does very, very quickly is it feels like it's a slap in the a slap on the wrist, like, hey, stop asking for stuff, go do it yourself. But what it's meant to be is to call to say that what breaks your heart, as Andy Stanley would say, what breaks your heart is the place you're supposed to start your ministry.
Yeah.
What breaks your heart is the place you're supposed to start. So if there's something that you keep bumping up against that you just go, that's not right, that shouldn't be. And I'm not talking about like the screen's the wrong size or something. I'm talking about this person seems to be lonely. This person needs this. This part of the church seems to be neglected. This person seems to be a little neglected. That what breaks your heart, you step into as a contributor.
Yeah.
You go, I want to help. I want to be a part of that. I want to make a difference. And if you see that as what the church is supposed to do, then the second half of this makes all the difference in the world. Is we don't exist, the church doesn't exist to make us happy, to make us joyful, to make our lives better.
The church doesn't exist to make you comfortable.
No, not to be comfortable. It absolutely exists to help the world, get out of what they're in, to provide safety, to provide healing, to provide an opportunity for growth. And when that starts to change in our hearts, I think we go to church differently. We attend church differently.
Yeah.
We think about church differently.
Yeah. 1 Peter talks about all believers being made a kingdom of priests, and priests are the people doing the worship. Mm-hmm. They are the people in the Jewish religion that Christianity came from. They're the people offering the sacrifices to God. They're the people leading the prayers. I don't know exactly how this breaks down, but rabbis and different people are the leaders of the local church for them, the synagogue where you study God's word, and they lead and interpret the study of God's word and do all those things. They lead prayer. They're the people who come to people who have spiritual issues, and
absolutely,
we're called to be those people in God's kingdom. All of us are the leaders to some extent.
The hope of this value is to say, hey, don't come into Kingsway looking to get. Come into Kingsway going, you know what? I have something to offer. There's something that God wants to use me to do. I have a role to play. And you know what? The world is going to be changed by this church, and I have a chance to be a part of it.
Yeah, and so one thing I want to say with that is there are a bunch of different ministries you can serve in. Mm-hmm. You can serve in the worship ministry. You can serve in the youth ministry. You can also serve in ministries that do not have a leader and do not have a name and do not have a budget. Mm-hmm. One of the greatest ministries you can serve in is being nice, being friendly, being welcoming. We won't schedule you to be welcoming. But if you show up here, you can totally serve by going up and talking to people you've never seen before and say, hey, how long have you been going to Kingsway? Oh, this is your first week? I'm so glad that you're here. And then ask them questions and like, where'd you grow up? Did you grow up around here? That's a good small town question. And what do you do for work? Do you whatever? And engage them as a person who matters. That's a ministry. None of us need to schedule you for that ministry or pay you for that ministry.
But you can do it all the same and do it well. I mean, one of my favorite things to do, and I know you know this too, is eat.
Yeah.
I just really enjoy eating. And I enjoy it for multiple reasons. One, if I'm eating good food, that's like my favorite.
Yeah.
Two, it's like the best social lubricant possible in the sense of taking what would be an awkward thing if you've ever sat across from a table from somebody and had nothing to do, nothing to talk about. Try taking the amount of time that a meal takes and don't eat anything and just sit there with people. It's a lot different, right? But you put some chips and salsa on the table, or you put, a cheeseburger and some fries on the table, and all of a sudden it becomes an enjoyable experience.
Yeah.
And it's not because the food is so good all the time. I mean, sometimes the food's great, but a lot of times it's because there's this natural, we're hanging out, we're talking, I feel comfortable, I'm choosing to engage with you and your time, and it really does fix. I know some of the best people that I've been mentored by, challenged biblically, walked with, been challenged personally in my marriage, in my personal walk with Jesus, has revolved around just getting together on a regular basis and getting coffee or lunch.
Yeah.
And you don't have to have a budget or a title or any kind of extra, just to be a guy or a girl that goes, do you want to get lunch? And then ask questions that maybe start with, where do you work and where did you grow up? But get to, how's your marriage? How are you doing?
Yeah.
You know, are you struggling? Do you need some help? We should hang out more. Can I pray for you? Can I engage with you that's beyond just the weather? You know, like, and making it consistent. I think those are some of the easiest ways to lift up and to be the church.
Yeah.
To
seriously.
be the church. And the whole goal of this, like I said, this value is to remind ourselves that when things are going a different direction, as our last time, when the method starts to change, and the method starts to change from what we're used to and the nostalgia of how we did things, and a program or a certain type of coffee or a cinnamon roll or our place that we used to sit in church gets changed, or what time the service is, or how often we, you know, it's like when all those little things start to change and we feel ourselves rising up as the consumer part of like, that doesn't fit what I want. That's not meeting my needs. That doesn't exactly know. Rather than seeing it as a folding of the arms and starting to go, you're not meeting my needs, we go, what if I? Or how can I? Or what can I do to help? What are some things that I am doing to provide for the world as the church?
That was one of the most, that was one of the things I really wanted to see from the traditional service at the church I was at before this. Is that traditional meant that generally more older people went to that service. What a lot of those people grew up in that church, and some of those people really took this idea to heart. They took their service. I say their service. They're not like forced legally to be in that service or by any penalty. The service
they attended intentionally.
They took that service as an opportunity to build and to maintain relationships and to pour care into other people's lives. They took that service as an opportunity to sit in the back so they could look at the back of people's heads who they knew and who they didn't know and pray for them.
Yeah.
And it was such an awesome experience. And then there were other people who were like, no, I'm here for the music style. And the music style, like if it is a fad that we're on because it's more effective for people who are younger in the faith, then that's the mushed up sweet potato baby food of what we're trying to do on a Sunday morning. And if you are spiritually 60 years old, that's the time where you're wanting to eat some steak.
Yeah.
And the steak of Christian maturity is praying for people, caring for people, looking for ministry in places that don't have a title and a budget. And
I'm so glad you said that, because honestly, this value is about defining what maturity looks like.
Yeah.
That's what this is.
Yeah.
And when you get further in your walk, it's not I need. It's I want to give. What can I give? What am I called to give? And where am I called to give and to serve? And I think when people read this value and they take it to heart to go, I have a role to play in what God is doing in the world through the church.
Yeah.
And I am not just here to consume what is being offered. I am here to plant seeds and to reap harvest and to move forward. One of my favorite things that you can do on a Sunday morning is if you come in with a bad attitude and the worship isn't your favorite that morning or the message doesn't hit you right, is that you would choose to turn your eyes to the people that are around you, and that you would start to minister to the people that you see. So great example of this is when you recognize that there's a family, you don't know their names, you pray for them before you meet them.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's one of the healthiest things you can do. You look across the way, you see a young family or an older couple, or you see someone sitting alone and it's their first time. They are nervous. It's hard for them to walk into a place like this for the first time, especially in a small town. And you don't think, oh, that's so-and-so's uncle's brother's second whatever. You just go, God, would you be with them today? They did the brave thing by showing up here today. would you be with them and walk with them and have this service be encouraging to them?
Yeah.
And if you would you let me play a role in helping them get connected?
Yeah.
If we had people doing that on a regular basis, our church is going to be effective with the message of the gospel moving forward. There's just no way it can't.
Yeah.
It's God ordained, as we are Christ ambassadors, with a message of hope. Galatians. So I think there's a huge part of what this is on a very simple level. It's quit whining and pick up a shovel or the basin and a towel. It's like, no. Just remember, for myself included, I have my own preferences sometimes of how I wish things went and how I think that worked and what time and when and how things would happen.
Yeah.
But that's not my job, to push my preferences. And that's not your job. Your job is to be flexible and to contribute and to recognize that what's happening is larger than me, larger than you, but we have a role to play if we choose to engage. Does that feel like it makes sense to you?
Yeah.
That's cool.
I loved what you said, that it's how we measure maturity.
Mm-hmm. It really is. It really is. And you feel that, right?
Yeah.
Last illustration. I have 3 kids, 9, 7, and 5. If all they do is keep asking, what do you have for me? What do you have for me? What do you have for me? And I look around and I see that their rooms are dirty and they haven't picked up and they haven't listened. They haven't done their homework. And they haven't even eaten what I put in there the last meal.
Yeah.
It's a conversation of, oh, you're young. You don't understand how a family works. When a family functions well, each child has responsibilities, whether it be young and chores, with keeping their rooms cleaned, participating and taking up. When they're asked to help, they participate without complaining. Yes, they have an opportunity to talk about the things they prefer, but it's always done out of a position of humility, out of a position of wanting things to be better.
Yeah.
And their response normally is and it's a functional thing. Like, we all recognize that we have a role to play for our family to be healthy.
Yeah.
And it's no different in the family of God. And it's no different in the way the church has been set up. We've each been given a role. We each been given a body part, as Paul
1
said.
Corinthians 12.
We've each been given a piece of the puzzle in order for this to really work. And each person has to contribute for the whole thing to work and be healthy and to move forward. And so that's the goal, is to redefine that. It's to refocus us on that. Sometimes when things get beyond what we prefer, to recognize that what I prefer and what you prefer does not matter. It's whether or not we are contributing and whether or not we are choosing to play the part that God has called us to. So I hope that's a helpful thing for you. And I know that may be a tricky thing that you've heard different ways. For us, it's meant to be something to know that you have a role to play, and there's something that you are being called by God to do, to contribute, because the church does not exist for us. We exist for the world. And that's the goal of this, to be a contributor, not a consumer. So
that's awesome.
I love it. I love that we're walking through these. We'll have 4 more. They may not be in consecutive weeks, but be keeping up. And once we get all 6 out, we'll make sure we put them in a playlist, and you'll be able to jump to all those. And we'll continue this conversation in the coming weeks.
Yeah.
So, thanks so much for tuning in. Have a great and glorious day in the Lord. We'll see you later.
See ya.